The alarm started screaming across every ship in the human fleet at exactly 0347 hours. Commander Daniel Hayes was already awake, sitting in his quarters aboard the UEN Valiant when the red lights began flashing. He had learned long ago that sleep was a luxury during times of war. He reached the bridge in under 2 minutes. His crew was already at their stations, their faces pale in the glow of dozens of screens showing the same terrible image. "Report," Hayes said as he took his seat. Lieutenant Commander Karen Mitchell turned from her weapons console. Her voice was steady, but Hayes could see the fear in her eyes. 200 ships, sir. They dropped out of hyperspace near Mars orbit. They're not hiding. They want us to see them." On the main screen, the alien fleet hung in space like a swarm of metal insects. Each ship was covered in thick plates of dark armor. Even from this distance, Hayes could see the strange symbols carved into their hulls. The Kovathi had arrived. "They're broadcasting on all channels," said Ensign Peter Collins from the sensor station. He was young, barely 22, fresh from the academy. His hands were shaking slightly as he worked his controls. "Should I put it through?" Hayes nodded. The screen flickered, and then a face appeared. It was not human. The Kovathi had gray skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Their eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. The creature on screen wore golden armor decorated with medals and symbols of rank. "I am High Commander Vectros of the Kovathi Empire's 7th Conquest Fleet," the alien said. His voice was cold and smooth, like ice sliding across metal. "Your world has been selected for incorporation into our empire. You will surrender your planet, your resources, and your people. Resistance is not recommended. We have conquered 47 species across this galaxy. None have stopped us. None ever will." The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Hayes stared at the screen where the alien face had been. 47 species. 47 worlds that had tried to fight and failed. "Sir," Karen said quietly, "intelligence reports say their armor is designed to stop energy weapons. Plasma, lasers, particle beams. Nothing gets through. That's how they've won every war. They just sit there and take whatever you throw at them. Then they destroy you." Hayes stood and walked closer to the main screen. The Kovathi ship sat motionless, waiting. They were in no hurry. They knew they would win. They always won. "Get me everything we have on their armor," he said. For the next 3 hours, Hayes and his senior officers studied every piece of information humanity had gathered about the Kovathi. It was not much. A few trading ships had encountered them before. Some long-range probes had sent back data before being destroyed. But the picture was clear enough that the Kovathi armor was remarkable. It used layers of reactive materials that absorbed and redirected energy. When a plasma bolt hit the hull, the armor would heat up, spread the energy across a wide area, and then release it harmlessly into space. Lasers were simply reflected. Particle beams were scattered. Every species in the known galaxy used some form of energy weapon, and the Kovathi had built their ships to laugh at all of them. "We're dead," Peter Collins whispered. He did not mean for anyone to hear, but the bridge was quiet enough that everyone did. Hayes was about to respond when Karen suddenly stood up from her station. She was staring at her screen with a strange expression on her face. "Sir," she said slowly, "their armor is designed to stop energy weapons. We know that, Lieutenant Commander." "No, sir. Listen to me. Energy weapons. That's all they've ever faced. That's all anyone in this galaxy uses." She turned to look at Hayes. "But we don't just use energy weapons, do we?" Hayes felt something shift in his chest. It was hope, small and fragile, but real. "The Railguns," he said. Karen nodded. "Every other species abandoned kinetic weapons hundreds of years ago. They thought they were primitive, Outdated. Why throw a rock when you can shoot a beam of pure energy? She pulled up a new display on the main screen. But we never stopped developing them. We couldn't afford the fancy energy systems, so we made our railguns better and better. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had been listening from her station near the back of the bridge. She stepped forward now, her dark eyes bright with sudden understanding. Our Mark 7 railguns accelerate a tungsten slug to 3% of light speed, Maria said. At that velocity, a 10-kilogram projectile carries more destructive force than a nuclear bomb. And it's not energy. It's just mass and speed. Pure kinetic impact. The Korvathi armor absorbs and redirects energy, Karen continued. But kinetic force doesn't work that way. You can't redirect a solid object to moving at 9,000 kilometers per second. It just goes through whatever's in front of it. Hayes looked at his officers. Then he looked at the screen, at the 200 enemy ships waiting to destroy everything he loved. You're telling me, he said carefully, that the most advanced alien empire in the galaxy built their entire defense system around one type of weapon. And they never considered that someone might still be throwing rocks. Karen allowed herself a small smile. That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. The bridge crew watched him, waiting. Outside, the Korvathi fleet sat in the darkness, confident and patient. Send a message to Fleet Command, Hayes finally said. Tell Admiral Chun that I have a theory I'd like to test. And tell him I'm going to need permission to pick a fight. He sat back down in his command chair and stared at the enemy ships on the screen. The Korvathi had conquered 47 species. They had never lost a war. They had armor that could stop any weapon in the galaxy, but they had never faced humans. And humans had never stopped throwing rocks. The UN Valiant moved through the darkness of space like a knife cutting through black water. Commander Hayes stood at the center of the bridge, watching the stars slide past on the main screen. Somewhere ahead, 5 Korvathi destroyers were waiting. Time to intercept? He asked. 47 minutes, sir, Peter Collins replied from his sensor station. Hayes nodded and turned to look at his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they gripped their consoles a little too tightly. But they were still here. They had not run. That meant something. Gather around, he said quietly. All of you. The bridge crew left their stations and formed a loose circle around their commander. Karen Mitchell stood at his right side, her hand resting on the sidearm she always carried. Maria Santos wiped grease from her fingers with a rag. Peter Collins stood at the back, trying to look braver than he felt. I want to tell you a story, Hayes said, about why we're different from every other species out there. He pulled up an image on his personal display and projected it for everyone to see. It showed an ancient weapon, 2 metal rails with a projectile resting between them. 300 years ago, humans invented the railgun. The idea was simple. Use electromagnetic force to push a piece of metal really, really fast. Faster than any chemical explosion could manage. The first railguns were weak. They could barely shoot through a wall. But we kept working on them. He changed the image. Now it showed the massive railgun batteries mounted on the Valiant's hull. Other species discovered energy weapons around the same time. Plasma, lasers, particle beams. Clean, efficient, powerful. They looked at kinetic weapons and laughed. Why throw a rock when you can throw light? So they stopped developing kinetic technology. Every species in the galaxy made the same choice. Energy was the future. Hayes paused, letting his words sink in. But humans were poor. We were new to space travel. We couldn't afford the expensive power systems that energy weapons needed. So we kept our railguns. And we kept making them better. Maria Santos spoke up. The Mark 7 railgun on this ship can accelerate a tungsten slug to 3% of light speed. That's about 9,000 kilometers per second. When that slug hits something, the energy transfer is enormous. We're talking about the same force as a small nuclear explosion delivered to a single point. And here's what matters, Hayes continued. The Corvathi have spent centuries perfecting armor that stops energy weapons. They've never lost because no one could get through their defenses. But their armor works by absorbing and spreading energy across a wide area. It's designed for heat, for radiation, for electromagnetic pulses. He looked at each of his crew members in turn. It is not designed for a solid piece of metal moving at 9,000 kilometers per second. You can't absorb that. You can't redirect it. Physics doesn't work that way. When our slug hits their armor, it's going to punch straight through, like a bullet through paper. The crew was silent. Hayes could see the understanding spreading across their faces. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Hope. We're about to fight 5 Corvathi destroyers, Hayes said. We're one ship against 5. By every normal measure, we should lose. But we have something they've never seen before. We have the one weapon in the galaxy that their precious armor can't stop. Karen Mitchell stepped forward. The targeting systems are calibrated and ready, sir. I've run the calculations 17 times. At our current range, the slug will reach the target in approximately 4 seconds after firing. What about their weapons? Peter asked. They still have plasma lances. Their plasma weapons are powerful, Maria admitted. But they're slow. Plasma moves much slower than our slugs. If we keep moving, keep changing our position, we can avoid most of their fire. Their ships are bigger, heavier. They're not built for speed. They're built to sit still and take punishment. Hayes checked his watch. 30 minutes until contact. Everyone back to stations, he ordered. Karen, I want the main railgun charged and ready. Peter, keep your eyes on those sensors. The moment they see us coming, they're going to react. I need to know what they do. The crew returned to their positions. The bridge fell quiet, except for the soft hum of electronics and the distant rumble of the engines. 20 minutes later, Peter Collins spoke up. Sir, I'm detecting the scout group. 5 destroyers arranged in a standard patrol formation. They've spotted us. There. They're holding position? They're not running? Karen asked. No, ma'am. They're just sitting there, waiting. Hayes understood. The Corvathi had never lost a ship to an inferior enemy. They were curious. They wanted to see what this single human vessel thought it could do against 5 of their warships. They're arrogant, he said quietly. Good, let's use that. The Valiant continued its approach. On the screen, the 5 Corvathi destroyers grew larger. Their dark armor seemed to drink in the starlight, making them look like holes cut into the fabric of space at 10,000 kilometers. Peter reported that the enemy was powering up weapons at 5,000 kilometers. Hayes gave the order. Karen, pick your target. Karen Mitchell's fingers danced across her console. The main railgun hummed as it drew power from the reactor. On the screen, a targeting circle appeared around the lead Corvathi destroyer. Target locked, sir. Hayes took a deep breath. This was the moment. Either they were right, and the railgun would tear through that alien armor like it was made of paper. Or they were wrong, and they would all die out here in the cold dark between worlds. Fire! The ship shuddered as the railgun released its payload. A tungsten slug, 10 kilograms of dense metal, accelerated to 9,000 kilometers per second in the span of a heartbeat. For 4 seconds, everyone on the bridge held their breath. Then the lead Corvathi destroyer exploded. The slug hit the bow of the alien ship and kept going. It tore through the armor like it wasn't there. It passed through the internal compartments, through the reactor, through the engine systems, and out the other side. The energy release was catastrophic. The destroyer came apart in a bloom of fire and twisted metal. "Direct hit," Karen reported, her voice shaking with disbelief and joy. "Target destroyed." On the screen, the 4 remaining Korvathi ships sat motionless for a long moment. Hayes imagined he could feel their shock, their confusion, their sudden fear. Then they began to move. "They're breaking formation," Peter called out. "They're trying to spread out." Hayes smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Don't let them." "Karen, fire at will." The Railguns spoke again and again, and the darkness of space filled with fire. Sub-Commander Thrin had served the Korvathi Empire for 60 years. He had fought in 11 wars against 11 different species. He had watched countless enemy ships break themselves against Korvathi armor while their crews screamed and died. He had never known defeat. Now he floated in the wreckage of his command, watching his blood drift away from his body in small red spheres. The human ship had destroyed 4 of his 5 destroyers in less than 3 minutes. His own vessel had been hit twice. The first shot had torn through the engine room, killing everyone inside. The second had ripped open the command deck. Most of his officers were dead. The few survivors were trying to seal the breaches, but it was hopeless. Thrin pulled himself to a damaged communication console. His fingers left trails of blood on the controls as he worked to establish a connection with the main fleet. "High Commander." Vectros's face appeared on the cracked screen. The fleet commander looked annoyed at being disturbed. "Sub-Commander, report." Thrin tried to speak, but he had to cough blood from his throat first. "High Commander." "The human ship. It destroyed us." Vectros's expression did not change. "Explain." "Their weapons. They don't use energy. They use projectiles. Solid metal, moving faster than anything I've ever seen. Our armor. It did nothing. The projectiles went straight through." For the first time in Thrin's long service, he saw something flicker across Vectros's face. It might have been surprise. It might have been fear. It vanished quickly. "Projectiles," Vectros repeated. "They threw rocks at you?" "Yes, High Commander." "They threw rocks. And the rocks killed us." The connection died as Thrin's ship lost the last of its power. He floated in the darkness, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, and waited for death to take him, far away, aboard the flagship Dominion of Korvath. High Commander Vectros stood in his command center and stared at the silent screen. Around him, his officers waited for orders. None of them spoke. None of them dared. "Projectile weapons," Vectros said finally. "Kinetic impact. No species has used such primitive technology in centuries. The humans never stopped developing them," one of his advisors said quietly. "Our intelligence reports mentioned it, but we dismissed it as irrelevant. We assumed they were simply too backward to build proper weapons." Vectros turned slowly to look at the advisor. The smaller Korvathi took a step back, suddenly afraid. "You're telling me," Vectros said, "that we dismissed the one weapon that could actually hurt us? Because we thought it was too primitive." "High Commander, no one could have predicted that they would be effective against our armor. The physics alone suggested that kinetic weapons were inferior in every way." Vectros walked to the main viewport and looked out at his fleet. 195 ships remained after the loss of Thrin's scout group. Each one was covered in the finest armor the Korvathi Empire could produce. That armor had protected them through 47 conquests, and now it was worthless. "Send word to all ships," Vectros ordered. "We advance on the human colony at Mars. We will crush them with numbers. Their weapons may be effective, but they are still outnumbered 3-1. We will lose ships, but we will win." His officers hurried to obey. Within the hour, The Kovathi fleet was moving again, sliding through the darkness toward Mars like a tide of black metal dot at the Mars Defense Station. Commander Hayes received the news with grim satisfaction. The scout group was destroyed. 4 enemy ships had been reduced to debris, and 1 had been left crippled as a witness. "They know now," Karen Mitchell said. "They know their armor won't save them." "They'll still come," Hayes replied. "They have too much pride to retreat. And they still outnumber us badly." The human fleet had gathered at Mars, 60 ships in total, including the 3 dreadnoughts that formed the core of Earth's defense force. The Valiant, the Defiance, and the Retribution. Each one carried dozens of railgun batteries. Each one represented the finest warship humanity had ever built. It still might not be enough. Admiral Chun's face appeared on the communication screen. She was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. "Commander Hayes, your theory proved correct. Well done." "Thank you, Admiral. But I'm afraid the real fight hasn't started yet." "No, it hasn't." Chun's expression was serious. "The Kovathi are sending their entire fleet at us. They're not running. They're not negotiating. They mean to destroy us through sheer numbers." Hayes nodded. "Then we need to make every shot count. If we can break their formation early, cause enough damage in the first few minutes, we might shake their confidence." "Agreed. I'm placing you in tactical command of the forward fleet. Take the Valiant and 20 of our fastest ships. Hit them hard and keep moving. The dreadnoughts will provide covering fire from fixed positions." "Understood, Admiral." Chun paused for a moment. "Daniel, if we lose this battle, Earth falls. Everything we've built, everyone we love. It all ends here. I know. Then make sure we don't lose." The screen went dark. Hayes stood alone on his bridge for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Behind him, his crew worked silently at their stations. Through the viewport, he could see the red surface of Mars rotating slowly below them. Millions of people lived on that world. Families, children, dreams for the future. All of them were depending on him and his crew. "Karan," he said quietly. "Sir?" "How are the railguns?" "Fully charged and ready. Maria says she can increase the fire rate by 12% if she bypasses some safety systems." Hayes almost smiled. "Tell her to do it. I don't think we'll need to worry about long-term maintenance after today." The first Kovathi ships appeared on the sensors 3 hours later. They came out of the darkness like a wave of shadows, their black armor making them almost invisible against the stars. 195 warships, each one larger than anything in the human fleet. But humans had something the Kovathi had never faced before. They had rocks. Very fast rocks. "All ships," Hayes said over the fleet communication channel. "This is Commander Hayes. You know what we're facing. You know the odds. But you also know something the enemy doesn't. Their armor means nothing against our weapons. Today, we show the galaxy what humans can do." He took a deep breath. "All railguns, prepare to fire on my command." The 2 fleets rushed toward each other across the darkness between worlds. In moments, the battle for Earth's survival would begin. The battle began with fire and silence. In space, there is no sound. Explosions bloom and fade without a whisper. Ships die in perfect quiet. But for the crews inside those ships, the noise was deafening. The screech of metal tearing. The roar of escaping atmosphere. The screams of the dying. Commander Hayes watched the first Kovathi wave hit the human defensive line. On his tactical display, enemy ships were represented by red dots. Human ships were blue. As he watched, 3 red dots vanished as railgun slugs tore through them. 30 enemy ships destroyed in the first exchange, Kara Mitchell reported. Her voice was steady despite the chaos around her. "They're spreading out, trying to make themselves harder to hit." "Stay on them," Hayes ordered. Forward group, follow me. We're going to cut through their center. The Valiant led 20 smaller ships in a diving attack on the Corvathi formation. Railguns fired continuously, each shot sending another piece of tungsten screaming across the void at unimaginable speed. Enemy ships exploded left and right. Debris scattered in all directions. But the Corvathi were not helpless. They had numbers, and they were learning. Enemy plasma fire incoming, Peter Collins shouted. Multiple sources. The Valiant shuddered as plasma bolts struck its shields. Warning lights flickered across the bridge. Somewhere in the lower decks, an alarm began to wail. Shields holding, Maria Santos reported from her engineering station. But we can't take many more hits like that. Hayes gripped his command chair as the ship rocked again. On the tactical display, he could see the Corvathi ships adjusting their strategy. They were no longer charging forward in a solid mass. Instead, they were spreading out, using their numbers to surround the human fleet. The Defiance is taking heavy fire, someone called out. Hayes looked at the display. The dreadnought Defiance was at the center of a swarm of enemy ships. Plasma bolts were striking it from multiple directions. Its shields flickered and failed. Then the plasma started hitting the hull directly. Defiance is reporting critical damage, the communications officer said. Captain Morris is ordering evacuation. Can we reach them? Hayes demanded. Karen shook her head. Not in time. They're surrounded. On the display, the blue dot representing the Defiance flickered once, twice, and then went dark. 2,000 crew members, gone in an instant. Hayes closed his eyes for a moment. He had served with Captain Morris for 15 years. They had been friends. Now Morris was dead, along with everyone under his command. Keep fighting, Hayes said quietly. Honor them by winning. The battle raged on. The human fleet was taking losses, but the Corvathi were suffering far worse. For every human ship destroyed, 10 enemy vessels were reduced to debris. The Railguns were performing exactly as Karen had predicted. The alien armor was useless against kinetic impact, but numbers mattered. The Corvathi still had over 100 ships, and the human fleet was down to 43. Sir, Maria Santos said suddenly. I have an idea. Hayes turned to look at her. Maria's face was covered in sweat, and her uniform was stained with grease from emergency repairs, but her eyes were bright. I can overcharge the Railguns, she explained quickly. Bypass the safety limiters, draw more power from the reactor. Each shot will hit harder. Much harder. What's the cost? The Railguns will burn out after maybe 10-15 shots. We'll destroy the weapons trying to save the ship. Hayes considered this for a moment. Around him, the battle continued. Explosions lit up the darkness. More ships were dying on both sides. Do it, he said. Maria nodded and ran for the engine room. 5 minutes later, the Valiant's Railguns were ready. Karen Mitchell targeted the largest ship in the enemy formation, a battlecruiser that had been directing fire against the human line. Firing overcharged railgun, she announced. The ship shuddered as the weapon released. The slug shot across space, faster and more powerful than any before it. When it hit the Corvathi battlecruiser, the ship simply came apart. The kinetic energy was so great that the armor, the hull, everything was torn to pieces. Direct kill, Karen said with satisfaction. Hayes allowed himself a small smile. Find me another target. But the Corvathi were adapting. High Commander Vectros, watching from his flagship, had noticed the Valiant's increased firepower. He understood that this one ship was the key to the human defense. Destroy it, and the rest would fall. All ships, Vectros commanded. Concentrate fire on the human dreadnought at coordinates 774. Destroy it at any cost. 50 Corvathi ships turned toward the Valiant. Sir, we have multiple enemies incoming, Peter Collins reported, his voice rising with fear. 50+ contacts, all converging on our position. Hayes looked at the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. They were surrounded. 50 enemy ships were closing in from all directions, their plasma weapons already charging. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "All weapons, fire at will." The Valiant twisted and turned through space, its railguns blazing. Enemy ships exploded around them, but more kept coming. The shields failed under the constant plasma bombardment. Hull breaches appeared across the ship. Crew members died at their stations. "Shields are gone," Maria reported through the internal communication system. "Hull integrity at 60% and falling." "Navigation is damaged," Peter added. "We're losing maneuverability." Karen fired the overcharged railguns again and again, each shot destroying an enemy ship. But there were too many. For everyone she killed, 2 more took its place. "Commander," Karen said quietly, "we can't win this. There are too many of them." Hayes knew she was right. The Valiant was dying. His ship, his crew, everything he had worked to protect. It was all slipping away. Then he saw something on the tactical display. The Retribution, the last human dreadnought, was moving. It was breaking formation, accelerating toward the Kovati ships surrounding the Valiant. "What is Captain Reeves doing?" Peter asked. Hayes watched as the Retribution plowed into the enemy formation. The dreadnought was firing every weapon it had, carving a path through the Kovati fleet. Enemy ships tried to stop it, but the Retribution kept coming. Then Hayes understood. Reeves wasn't trying to win. He was trying to buy time. The Retribution rammed directly into a Kovati battlecruiser. Both ships exploded in a massive fireball, destroying 3 more enemy vessels nearby. Captain Reeves and his entire crew were gone. But the Kovati formation was broken. The ships surrounding the Valiant scattered in confusion. "Reeves," Hayes whispered. Then, louder, "All ships, push forward. Honor their sacrifice. Push forward and end this." The remaining human fleet surged ahead, railguns blazing. The Kovati, their formation in chaos, struggled to respond. But in the center of the enemy fleet, the Dominion of Korvath still stood. High Commander Vectros still commanded. And he was not ready to give up. "Find me that ship," Vectros snarled, pointing at the Valiant on his display. "Destroy it, now." The battle was not over yet. The Valiant was dying. Commander Hayes could feel it in the way the deck trembled beneath his feet. He could hear it in the groaning of stressed metal and the hiss of escaping air. Damage reports scrolled across every screen, each one worse than the last. "Hull integrity at 32%, Maria Santos reported through the crackling internal communication system. "We've lost power to decks 4 through 7. Life support is failing in multiple sections." "How many crew do we have left?" Hayes asked. "About 400. I've ordered everyone to the upper decks and the escape pods." Hayes nodded slowly. 400 out of the 2,000 who had started this battle. So many gone. So many families who would never see their loved ones again. "Sir," Karen Mitchell said from her weapons station, "the overcharged railguns are finished. I've got maybe 2 or 3 shots left in the secondary batteries, and that's it. What about our other ships?" Peter Collins checked his sensors, though the display was flickering and damaged. 18 human ships still operational, sir. The Kovati are down to about 40. Hayes stared at the tactical display. The numbers still favored the enemy, but not by much. If they could just take out the Kovati flagship, the Dominion of Korvath, the rest might break and run. But the Dominion was heavily protected. Vectros had pulled his remaining ships into a tight formation around the flagship. Getting close enough to hit it would be almost impossible. "Commander," Maria's voice came through the communicator again. "I need to tell you something. Remember those prototype weapons I was working on? The mass driver torpedoes?" Hayes frowned. The project that was canceled because they were too expensive. I never actually stopped working on them. I've got 12 of them in Cargo Bay 3. They're basically railgun slugs with their own engines. Fire them from an escape pod, guide them remotely, and they hit almost as hard as our main guns. Karen looked up sharply. You built weapons in secret? That's against about 50 regulations. Are you going to report me? Maria asked. Karen thought about it for half a second. No. Tell us more. Hayes felt something stir in his chest. Hope, small and desperate, but real. Can we get them loaded and ready to fire? He asked. Give me 10 minutes. You have 5. While Maria and her engineering team worked frantically in the cargo bay, Hayes studied the tactical display. The Dominion of Korvath sat at the center of the enemy formation like a queen surrounded by her guards. Vectros was smart. He knew his flagship was a target, so he was keeping it protected. But the tight formation that protected the Dominion also made it predictable. The escort ships couldn't move quickly without exposing the flagship. If the torpedoes could slip through the gaps in their defense, if Peter could guide them precisely enough, it might work, Hayes muttered to himself. Sir? Karen asked. Nothing. Just hoping. 4 minutes later, Maria reported that the torpedoes were ready. They had been loaded into 12 escape pods, each one modified to act as a launch platform. Peter Collins had linked his sensor console to the torpedo guidance systems. I can control them remotely, Peter said. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Once they're launched, I'll guide them through the enemy formation to the Dominion. You'll only get one chance, Hayes warned him. The Korvathi will figure out what we're doing and start shooting them down. Then I won't miss. Hayes looked around his bridge. His crew looked back at him. They were exhausted, wounded, terrified. But they were still here. They were still fighting. Launch the torpedoes, Hayes ordered. 12 escape pods shot out from the Valiant's battered hull. They scattered in different directions, each one carrying its deadly cargo. The Korvathi sensors detected them immediately, but at first, the enemy did nothing. Escape pods were not a threat. Humans running away from a dying ship were nothing to worry about. Then the torpedoes ignited their engines and began accelerating toward the Dominion. Peter Collins leaned forward in his seat, his fingers dancing across the controls. On his screen, 12 blue dots were weaving through the enemy formation. Red dots moved to intercept, but Peter was faster. He adjusted trajectories, changed speeds, made each torpedo dance through the chaos of battle. Enemy ships are firing on the torpedoes, Karen reported. They've destroyed 2, 3, 4, 8 still active, Peter said through gritted teeth. Come on. Come on. On the Dominion of Korvath, High Commander Vectros watched the incoming weapons with growing alarm. He had never seen anything like them. Small, fast, impossible to track. Shoot them down, he ordered. All weapons, shoot them down. Plasma bolts filled the space around the flagship. 2 more torpedoes exploded. A third was knocked off course and spiraled away into the void. But 5 got through. Peter Collins let out a shout of triumph as his remaining torpedoes slipped past the last line of defense. They hit the Dominion almost simultaneously, each one striking a different part of the massive flagship. The kinetic energy was tremendous. Even with its thick armor, the Dominion could not survive. The first torpedo breached the forward hull. The second destroyed the weapons array. The third hit the engine room. The fourth and fifth struck the command center, tearing through the bridge where Vectros stood watching his defeat. The High Commander had one final moment of clarity before the end. He thought about all the species he had conquered, all the worlds he had claimed for the Empire. He had believed himself invincible. He had thought his armor would protect him forever. and then some primitive humans threw rocks at him. And it was over. The Dominion of Corvath broke apart in a cascade of explosions. The flagship that had led 47 conquests died in the darkness between worlds, brought down by weapons that the galaxy had dismissed as obsolete centuries ago. The surviving Corvathi ships watched their command vessel die. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, they began to turn away. They had come to conquer. They had been conquered instead. There was nothing left to do but run. "They're retreating," Peter Collins said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're actually retreating." Hayes watched the red dots on his display fleet toward deep space. Of the 200 ships that had come to destroy humanity, only 34 escaped. "It's over," Corinne Mitchell said. She was crying, tears floating away from her face in the zero gravity. "We won." Hayes nodded slowly. The Valiant was barely holding together. Most of his crew was dead. The human fleet had been reduced to 18 battered ships. But Earth was safe. Mars was safe. Humanity would survive. "Send a message to Fleet Command," he said quietly. "Tell them the battle is over. Tell them we won." 6 months later, a Corvathi diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth. They came to negotiate peace, not war. The Empire, that had never lost a battle, was suing for terms. Commander Hayes, still recovering from injuries sustained in the battle, gave a statement to the press gathered outside the United Nations building. "They built their armor to stop every weapon in the galaxy," he said. "They forgot the oldest lesson in warfare. There's always a bigger rock." Far across the galaxy, a Corvathi historian was recording the battle for the Imperial Archives. He struggled to find the right words to describe what had happened. Finally, he wrote, "They armored their ships against every weapon known to the civilized galaxy. They never expected to face a species primitive enough to still throw rocks, yet advanced enough to throw them at the speed of light. The humans taught us a valuable lesson that day. Never underestimate the power of simple solutions in the hands of determined people." He paused, then added one final line: "Never underestimate humans." And somewhere in the rebuilt halls of the UN Valiant, a small plaque hung on the wall of the bridge. It read simply, "They threw rocks, and the rocks won."